So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Matt Kasecki, and I am the Community Outreach and Education Coordinator with NAMI Greater Cleveland. We're joined for today's presentation, which is on the topic of mental health considerations for young adults and college students by Dr. Mackenzie Varkula, who is a psychiatrist specializing in child and adolescent mental health, who is also a board member for NAMI Greater Cleveland, as well as NAMI Ohio. So she's very familiar with the work of NAMI. Um, Please be aware this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the NAMI Greater Cleveland YouTube channel later this week. We will also ensure that you receive the slides from this presentation in a follow-up email afterwards, along with a link to the evaluation that I will ask you to complete at the end. Please do remain muted during the presentation so we can limit background noise. Please remain off camera if you do not want to be seen, since we are recording. And please be aware that I will be monitoring the chat during the presentation for questions for Dr. Varkula, although we will also have time for Q&A as we wrap up into the last 5 or 10 minutes of this presentation. Many of you are likely already familiar with the work of NAMI. Just very briefly, NAMI Greater Cleveland, our mission is dedicated to improving quality of life for individuals with mental illness and their families. We do that by providing education, support, information, and referral, and advocacy. You can always attend any of our programs, which are free and open to the general public, including virtual educational programs like this, a family-to-family course, a peer-to-peer course, or any of our peer or family support groups. You can also always call the NAMI helpline during normal business hours during the week. I think I will leave my intro to NAMI there and pass the baton to Dr. Varkula to begin presenting on this topic. Thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. It's nice to be here. And my goal is to share a little bit of information, but also share some resources and definitely save some time for questions, because I think I can only predict what you want to know here. I imagine there's a little bit more that I didn't prepare for. So I don't have anything to disclose. Matt disclosed all of my secrets, like board help, and I think you'll see why NAMI does so well at what they're doing based on what I'm going to talk about here today. So we're going to talk about adulthood. I think it's worthwhile to take a minute and try and define adulting, try and define what adults are. Adult, I like to think of as a transition and not an event. I joke with my patients, teenagers, folks older than me, that I'd sometimes look around and wonder who put me in charge. You know, how did I get to be an adult here? And I think of that as a parent, as a doctor, and in a variety of other circumstances. It's sometimes a rude awakening to look around and be like, wait, I'm supposed to be driving the ship here. But so starting with the definition, which is as the song says, a very good place to start. An adult could be a person, a grown-up. And again, I also, you know, in my 40s, I still talk about when I grow up, what I would like to do and what I would like to be. So again, here we have a definition that I'm not quite sure puts things in black and white. I hear more people using the word adult as a verb, I think, the older I get. Do we really have to adult today? That's one of my favorites. They're under the verb, and this is just from the online dictionary. But then there's also certainly legal terms, and those are ones that we do have to, all joking aside, have to be mindful of. From a law standpoint, 21. In other ways, 18. So I like to think of here, you know, it points out that such as a 21-year-old. Well, what's an 18-year-old? Why isn't it 18 in this definition? But so again, we're not fully black and white, but my point in this slide here is to let you know, definitions certainly change over time and are not always gray. So when we're talking about today, becoming a young adult, teen mental health. I am going to use young adult loosely. I think teen versus young adult also is a pretty nice spectrum, and I don't think there's a point in time from an age standpoint at which we are progressing very fully. I don't think we always follow that spectrum line at a linear or a constant miles per hour pace. But I do think that it is a developmental stage regardless. I think in medicine and in reading lay public writings, we think about development more so when we think about kids. When are we walking? When are we talking? Think about it. I wanted to share with you a little bit of what we see less. Even though our feet might not be growing anymore, or we may not be putting inches on, there are many things happening in our brain. So I'm going to cover a little bit of what's happening in the brain of a teen and young adult before everybody's lunch kicks in and y'all zone out on me. But things that I think are important to know are that just because our bodies may be slowing down and growing less, there is mad growth happening. And basically late teens and into your 20s. So I always tell people your brain's done growing at about 25. Not exactly, sometimes maybe 26, sometimes a little bit earlier. People often ask me, it seems like girls mature first. Okay, so maybe we're done at 24. I like to give everybody, the benefit of a little bit of gray area. And so I say about 25, but I don't want you to take that as a cutoff. But the things that happen from this 15 to 25 age range, there is quite a bit of activity happening in the brain. And to put it simply, what we're doing is decreasing gray matter. Or so if you're thinking about maybe getting your garden ready right now, we're pruning. We're kind of cutting back some of the tracks of nerves or the wiring in your brain. We're cutting back the things that you aren't using. We don't need certain neural pathways because we've learned better. We may not need to know how to throw a temper tantrum because we can speak. That's the one I often tease my own children about. Like, you don't need this behavior anymore. You know how to speak and have a conversation. So let's get rid of that. But basically, the gray matter, or the more simple parts of the brain, are being pruned back, and we're growing this white matter or cortex. And that's the part of the brain that we think of as being really human. If we're going to compare a human brain to perhaps an iguana brain, humans are going to have a little bit more white matter, a lot more white matter. That's the part that's thinking. So this is the high functioning cortex. The white matter is connections. So while we're pruning back the gray matter, this white matter is growing and connecting. And if you look on the slide in the bottom right-hand corner, that's a neuron. That's one nerve cell. And you can see the center that holds all of our DNA and all that good stuff is the color purple in the middle. And then you see where it's starting to grow. It almost is an arm that is reaching out. And that happens throughout our brain, throughout the different parts of the brain. We're growing, we're reaching, and we're forming new connections. And one of the things that happens after the growth is happening is we get some insulation there, so that not only can we reach different parts and reach new areas of the brain, but we can do it quickly and efficiently. So that's what the myelin sheath, it's called. The myelin sheath, it's called, come on back, I apologize, is the insulation, and helps us move quickly and efficiently. And so myelination of the brain is kind of the last step. When people ask me, okay, how do I know if my brain's mature? If we were going to shrink down and go in there and look around, we would see myelinated brain. That's how we are most effectively using our connections. We've grown them, we've created this myelin, and we are ready to adult. Also, just so you know, this website here, the NIMH, I am borrowing some this Teen Brain 7 Things to Know because there's no point in creating something that is already good. And I liked this as an outline. So you're welcome. This is available on this NIMH website or with my slides. So adolescence is important. Adolescence is important for brain development. So we've got this growth, we've got this pruning back, we've got the insulation happening. And while all of that is happening, while we're pruning, while we're growing, while we're forming new connections, which constitutes learning, new connections are how we learn. I'll come back to that. We're living life. So things that we do in our teens and early 20s definitely affect how capable our brains are of growing, of stretching out, of making new connections. And this is one of the reasons that I think alcohol is pertinent. I have kids ask me, and I have adults ask me too, is it really worth um, clamping down on my child and saying, no, you can't drink until you're 21? If child psychiatrists ran the world, you wouldn't drink till you're 25. That would be the law. 21 is a bit outdated from a brain science standpoint. And I'm going to use a metaphor to explain it. One of the reasons, so I borrowed, when I was putting this talk together, I was just happened to, I read the BBC, and this, you can see it's March 1st, but this reporter, David Robson, he's very interested in development and health and things like that. And I saw this pop up. So I thought this was cool. And I liked the comparison that he and the psychologist that he was citing in the article. And it's a free article, you can Google it. But I liked the comparison that he used, and so I'm going to borrow it. And he is comparing our brains to a car. And so I have the car pedals there because we're gonna use those. But just to look at the two parts of the brain, the bottom left and the bottom right, we've got the prefrontal cortex. So I told you the cortex is the part of the brain that does the thinking. This is the part that we want to develop to allow us to adult. So it's the part that's growing, that's forming, that's new connections, that's getting insulated. The prefrontal cortex, which in the picture is everything else is blue, but it is yellow or orange, or however you interpreted that. The prefrontal cortex is kind of like the brakes of a car. This is your executive function. This is the part of the brain that I always talk about. I wake up with my morning coffee. It's the part that organizes. It's the part that keeps us motivated and organized and knowing where we're going today and making sure we pick up our kids at the end of the day, and that we're wearing pants when we leave the house. This is the planning, organization. What do I need to do? This is the boss part of the brain. It is also capable of putting the brakes on. And sometimes when we talk about ADHD, we think about people having trouble putting the brakes on. And so just from I think it's interesting standpoint, when we use medicine to treat ADHD, it acts on this prefrontal cortex to help kind of tune up our brakes. So think of that prefrontal cortex part as the brake pedal. And then if we move to the other side, the limbic system is like the gas pedal. And the gas pedal in teenagers is super sensitive. You can see the person up maybe taking some risks and thrill seeking, if you will. But the limbic system is deeper inside the brain. And this is the part that is maturing before. So this part is maturing as we're growing up, latency age, puberty. And so when we're doing dangerous activities in our teen years, it's often because that brake pedal hasn't really gotten up to speed with the gas pedal. We are quite capable of pressing the brake pedal in our limbic system. The rewards, feeling pleasure, risk-taking, excitement, falling in love. These are things that are mediated in this limbic system, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus. That's developing before our brakes are developing. And so we are riskier. We do tend to say things a little bit faster, do things a little bit faster, because our brakes aren't caught up with the rest of our body. And so I like that comparison, because if I'm driving a car that has a very sensitive gas pedal, I want my brakes to be in tune. But that's what a teenage body is like driving. And I had a really good question the other day. Someone asked me about this system. So is that why people fall in love so hard and so fast in their teen years? And I think it is. I think we never quite feel the same as we do as a teenager. We're just capable of feeling harder and faster and more intense because we don't know how to use brakes yet. So when the limbic system is the primary system and we're just forming our cortex, um, we can get into some trouble. Now, going back to the article, why is alcohol so dangerous? Well, alcohol makes us less inhibited. Inhibition is a brake. So if we have some basic inhibitions in this limbic system, it's not all gas pedal, but it's mostly gas pedal. But if we have some inhibitions, survival instincts, I like to think of them, and we are going to douse them in alcohol. It's like we're driving now on a paved road in the rain with a hyperactive gas pedal and bad brakes. So we are really disinhibiting the maybe, I don't know, whatever sort of safety net we have in this car that is our body. And we get into a cycle. So above and beyond any dependency issues, that's not where I'm going with this yet, even though there is certainly data on earlier use, excuse me, leading to dependency. It really, what I wanted, the illustration here, and sticking with my metaphor, it's really making these brakes that aren't fully formed yet even more likely to fail. So this is one of my, when I tell people, there's legal issues, but then there's also your brain issue. We really want you to be able to stay safe and survive your teens and young adulthoods. But the likelihood of car accidents, things like that, obviously are more when someone is disinhibited. But what we see then is a more rapid decline. When someone is providing alcohol as a marinade for their developing brain, we actually see more decline in gray matter and a slower growth in white matter. So what we end up with is someone who has an out of balance sort of maturity. So people are pruning the inside, the base part of the brain, and are not growing as fast as peers of same age who are not marinating in alcohol. And we get a little lopsided, we get a little bit behind. And I think sometimes that takes us into early adulthood, and we're a little bit more immature because of it, not just while intoxicated when we are disinhibited, but because we've really slowed down the development of the white matter of the prefrontal cortex. We haven't allowed our brake to be tuned up. And I think especially in comparison with our peers. I think that's the only neuroanatomy I'm going to give you, and there's no quiz. But the limbic system is your gas, the prefrontal cortex is your brake, and the alcohol, especially repeat exposure to alcohol, is really going to slow the development of that boss part of the brain, or your brake's getting a tune up. So that's my thought about alcohol to kind of cover this whole teens and early adulthood. Oh, I lied. I do have a little bit more neuroanatomy, but basically what I wanted to point out here. So this is this is your prefrontal cortex from a different view. So I gave it to you from the side on this slide, and here I'm showing you kind of from the top and from the middle. So basically, what I want to talk about here is the social part. So why people I think often say to me, why is my teenager so interested in his friends? Best friend could tell him the same thing I'm telling him. I'm dumb, best friend's brilliant. Well, our brains are developing and feeling social interactions differently. And where we're seeing, this is actually, I think, another nice way of what I was saying in the previous slide. If you look at this little graph, where you see the limbic regions, this emotional gas pedal, is really spiking during adolescence. And you're getting much higher, much more capability, much more reactivity from that gas pedal in the emotional area than you are the boss side. So what's fun? Hanging when you're 15, hanging out with your best friend or hanging out with your mom? Um, Probably with a friend, even though perhaps I know that prefrontal cortex is telling me, whenever I hang out with this friend, I'm getting in trouble. Yeah, but it's so fun. My brakes aren't good. My gas pedal's good. I'm going with the friend. I'm hanging out with the friend. So we're also feeling connections differently. And connection is probably my main takeaway from this talk. This limbic region, having connections with people, being able to make connections with people and feel the reward that we get from that is definitely part of this limbic region development. We are feeling this and we are kind of throwing caution to the wind. We are falling in love. We are falling in love with a person or a sport or a hobby. And we're really feeling that reward as opposed to, do I really want to be playing Madden on the video game all night, or do I really want to go to sleep so that I'm ready for my physics test tomorrow? That's a pushing the brake. That is just not as developed as the, wow, one more game. I really love this game and I'm hooked up with my best buddy across town. So we do see people more likely to take risks, get rewards, and video games are all about risk reward. That's why people get hooked on them, grown-ups and kids alike. They're made for this risk reward. And then based on like what the graph is showing here, your brakes or your boss brain just isn't developed to the extent of being able to overpower the emotional gas pedal. So that's the wiring piece. That sets up the stage, kind of assigns the character of this teenage and young adulthood. And let's put some stress on that, right? So it's not all video games and hanging out with your buddies. I hope that my audience knows Ferris Bueller. I showed this to my the Ferris Bueller's Day Off to my teenage kids, and they thought it was funny, but they weren't really impressed. So I'm hoping it hasn't lost it yet. But we've got this buddy of Ferris's here, and he tends to be the stressful one in the crowd. And I think, so this is another NIMH fact sheet. I get a lot of questions from folks about how do you know when someone's stressed out and it's a reasonable stress versus anxiety or depression. And I think that that's a great question and it's another gray area, but I really like this overlap because it points out stress can be positive. So if you look the bottom left-hand corner, stress can be positive or negative. And what stress does is it requires us to change what we're doing. A stressor might require us to walk a different way. A stressor might require us to solve a problem in a different way. And that stress, I'm going to go with positive here for a minute, requires those brain cells, those white brain cells, to form new attachments, to reach out in a way that we weren't reaching out 5 minutes ago. So we want stressors. We want changes, we want new experiences because those trigger the brain growth, and it triggers brain growth in a very diverse way. So the more we can encounter, the more richness that we encounter, good or bad, helps us form new brain connections, circuits, and then we can go on later and reinforce which of those roads or which of those networks in our brain are helpful and useful. Now, when stress is negative, we can still learn. This is what makes us wise older folks, I like to think. So a negative stress may cause us to change, to stop, and to find a new way of solving a problem. Very common ways that teens experience stress are interpersonal interactions. When I used to work inpatient psychiatry, I think one of the biggest reasons that I would see folks admitted, kids, admitted was a relationship stressor. So a breakup with a significant other, a rejection, an argument. These are things that, again, we're feeling in that limbic system that we may not in our frontal cortex be able to say, well, let me put myself in their shoes. Well, I was kind of a jerk. Well, actually, I didn't know the whole story. That comes later. Those are more adulting sorts of tasks. What we do feel is we feel it hard. We feel the rejection hard. We feel hurt hard. We feel joy. And so these are things that cause new neural networks. So we want stress, we want new experience. Anxiety is when we start to cross over. And in addition to those stresses, we're having trouble turning off the stress. We're having trouble saying, I'm done with that. I'm going to go play my video game now. We start to feel it in our bodies, and our bodies store tension. We lose sleep, which we all need, not just young adults and teens, but very important. So then we start to cross over into anxiety symptoms, and anxiety is probably something that I am hearing more and more and more and more. And I think if we look at statistics, we're seeing that kids are just kind of exploding when it comes to reported anxiety. So I kind of covered the teen brain is ready to learn and adapt, right? I explained a little bit of forming new networks. Those are triggered by experience, positive or negative stress. Why do the teen brains respond differently than maybe to a 40-year-old woman? Well, because we've got that gas pedal and brake pedal disproportionate sensitivity. So I like to think I have pretty good brakes in my brain, and I think I do. Sometimes that makes me not so fun, but my brakes are a lot better than for teens, and that's definitely an issue. They're going, they're sliding, they don't have the brakes to put on, and that can make you feel really out of control sometimes. Sleep, like I mentioned, I don't think science has a good enough understanding of all that happens during sleep. What we do know is sleep is pretty much related to everything. When people talk to me about feeling overwhelmed, I ask, are you sleeping? When people are tired, I ask, are you sleeping? When people have trouble worrying, how are you falling asleep? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you trying to sleep and you can't? Or are you not allowing yourself to get enough sleep? I'm a big believer in sleep, personally and professionally. While all this is happening, and probably because all of this brain growth, pruning, growing is happening, this is when we do start to see major mental illness present. Puberty, brain growth, development, all of this, it's not a coincidence that this is when we start to see patterns of behavior, patterns of emotion, and the way that we diagnose mental illness is a disorder, which is a pattern. So I always tell people we're talking about patterns. Now, I think finally, the pandemic, the Surgeon General, we're starting to see mental illness get some time in the news, every aspect of news, be it on your phone, on a chat, on a parent meeting from school. There is a extensive, I don't know if anyone's taken a look at it, but there's an extensive link. No, the report is extensive. There's a link here, and I really liked the Surgeon General's breakdown. He does present data if you're interested. It's a hefty report, but you can pick through. He talks about what can we do as individuals, as parents, as educators, as policy makers. He gives recommendations. I don't know that anyone's following them, but there is information there, and this is public knowledge. You can take this to your school board. You can take this to your college, and you can say, hey, what are you doing? How are you using this information that we have? Now, it's not necessarily new information. The Surgeon General's report, and he refers to it quite a bit, is a survey, a longstanding survey called, here we go, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This is something that has been administered for years and years and years. And the goal of this survey is to assess how often behaviors exist. So when people ask me what's normal, I tell them I hate the N word. I hate the normal word. Does normal mean ideal, or does normal mean what most people are doing? So I like to clarify that. I think that this youth risk behavior survey tells us what people are doing. It is a direct questionnaire of teenagers, and the organization of the report of each each youth risk behavior survey, it happens every 2 years. The organization of the report is broken down into sexual behavior, substance use, violence. We're going to look a little bit more at the mental health and suicidality, especially because the pre-pandemic data looks at this decade of 2011 to 2021. And I think that one of the biggest magnifying glasses here has been the pandemic, causing us to look into what's happened to people graduating from high school, starting high school, graduating from college. How has the pandemic affected us from a mental health standpoint? And it's really, you can access this data. It is available to the public. You could write a paper based on data that's found here as long as you cite it. So you can get as nitpicky as you want. I like it because they look a little bit at green, yellow, and red. What do we see that's good? What do we see that's alarming? And what do we see that is, not so good? And I think because we're talking about it, there's a fair amount of red here in these years that went pre to during the pandemic. So I just want to show if you put YRBS in the Google, it's going to find it. But this is where I think you're going to find some of these infographics, and also a link to the data set if you're interested. Basically, now they do put together a report every so often. So I'm going to pull parts of that report again to point out that they're finding in 2021. Again, if you're interested, what are kids reporting? These are high school students. And if we're looking at female students, 60% of female students are experiencing persistent sadness or helplessness. We're looking at the LGBTQ plus because they are just an exaggeration of whatever gender they're identifying with. So we're seeing also 10% of female students have attempted suicide. This is high school students. This is 1 in 10 females in high school. More than 20% LGBTQ plus students attempting suicide. I mean, this is people are admitting to it. So people always ask me, what's the bias? The bias is we're underreporters. We're not proud of this behavior, and so we tend to underreport. This is scary, what people are willing to report. So looking at trends, 2011 to 2021, we're seeing increases. This would be all red if I was showing those certain colors here. So, right. So we see where they use the color. If we're looking at that persistent feeling of sadness, like I said, female, if we're looking 10 years before pandemic time, these are significant increases. The boys are not getting off easy. They've increased, but not as significantly as female. Now, again, this is not a why. If you want to write the paper on why, the data is available to you. But what we're seeing is a pretty significant and alarming trend. It also can show race and ethnicity. It breaks it down by sexual identity and interactions. Again, we're looking at 2021, 18% of high school students are making a suicide plan. You can break it down further and see, this is the colors on the left. This is now attempted suicide, considered attempting suicide. And a serious consideration is having a plan. This is what we ask kids when we talk to them. Almost one third of females have seriously considered attempting suicide. 22%, that's 1 in 5. When you think about your kids, social network, these are huge numbers. And I'm assuming because we're all here today, this is not new information, but what it is are data sets. This is data. It's very hard to argue as a policymaker with data. They want data. Yes, they want to hear personal stories. When you're going to advocate, when you're joining a NAMI advocacy day, you want to have a personal story. You want to have a why should you care senator? Why should you care congressman? But here we have trends, we have frequency, we have data. Connections, what helps? Doesn't matter what agency's website you're going to go to. You go to the CDC. This is I borrowed from the CDC to let you know they're onto this as well. People need connections. Having connections works. One of the problems with depression is that it makes us feel alone and makes us underappreciate or undervalue or under-recognize connections. People with depression can feel lonely in a crowd. It's a superpower nobody wants. But when we're looking at the high numbers of folks who are considering attempting suicide, what decreases that? In any part of medicine, we would say, what is a modifiable risk factor? We can't change genetics. We can't change something awful that has happened to an individual. What we can change are what is the structure in place now, or what is the structure that we can put in place to help reduce the risk that someone's going to try and take their life. And the connectivity piece is where we see what can I do? How can I help? Adults who experience strong connections. So this could be a coach, this could be a friend, this could be a parent. It may be something that someone goes into kicking or screaming, or you have to bribe them. I often ask my teenage patients, how'd you get here? Were you drugged? Were you coerced? Or were you tricked? Doesn't matter. I have them now. I have a captive audience. But this connection piece is a definite, significant, hands down, doesn't matter whose data you're using. I'm using what I'm using, but you're going to see a decrease in risk overall. So this is a modifiable risk factor. Here's a little bit more data on what happened during the pandemic, specifically with youth and young adults. And it gives some bigger numbers. 1 in 3 are experiencing mental illness, and this is consistent. This hasn't gone down, I'm sorry, in 2024, again, probably while you're here. 1 in 6 are experiencing a major depressive episode. Well, this is likely when it's going to happen for the first time, age 12 through 17. Why? Again, this is all that brain growth, all that brain activity. This is when it happens. The brain is a really, really dynamic place. Mental health and suicidality. Here are some other, again, from the CDC, here are some other statistics. And what I want to point out on this one, what reduces the likelihood of those attempts, plans, what have you, people who felt connected to people at school. So if you are under 18, you're going to school. So if we can connect you there to friend, to teacher, to coach, to club, this is where this is a modifiable risk factor. So how do we do it? How do we connect people? This is where I think I hear from, excuse me, mental health professionals that prevention is definitely something we can do. Engaging people and connecting them early can help, again, reduce those risks in the long term. During a crisis is a time when, and I'm not going to define crisis again for you because we all have them differently, but what do you need in a crisis? You need a connection. This is why we have, excuse me, health lines, helplines, text lines, drop-in places, emergency rooms. We need help in a crisis. I often use, and again, I love NAMI, and I'm not going to invent something that NAMI already has. When I'm working with a patient who is finally, established has established care with me, has the therapist, and we are starting to improve, we're starting to decrease symptoms, I love pulling up this NAMI booklet, and it's a printout, or it's available in Spanish as well, as you can see. But basically what it does is it looks at what have we learned. Again, this is that wisdom part I love. What have we learned from the past, and how can we use it to prevent crises from happening again? And one of the things that I think you're going to see on any sort of crisis plan, or they do a lot of relapse plans at hospital discharge, number 1 right there, emergency resource number 1. Who is it? And this does not say person's name. This could be a hotline. This could be a doctor. This could be I go to this location. But also, who can you, who from a professional standpoint can you call? I know my office has, I think everywhere has a emergency line that you can call. They may forward you to the 988 number, but you call someone's name or number, your therapist, your doctor, they are going to have someone on call. And so that's going to be at the top of everything. But I think having these plans and having them written, anyone who's experienced a crisis knows that your brain, again, this prefrontal cortex part, the boss brain, the brain's not working at its best. It's hijacked by that gas pedal, and that gas pedal is trying to get you out of that crisis. Your brakes are not really working well. If you can have this, if you can have it on the side of your refrigerator, if you can take a picture and send it to your emergency contact, they can walk you through it. That connection. There is a specific resource on the NAMI website for college mental health. And I have to tell you, I'm not going to go through this with you now because we're all capable of going through this on our own. One of the things that this encourages folks to do is connect. You're going to college? Okay, who are you going to connect with? You're going to have connections that you don't have much choice about, for example, roommate, professor, but who are you going to really connect with? How are you going to get to know people? And I think part of this guide says that the best way of coping with stress when it does happen is having a plan, being involved with someone, having a relationship with someone. And the best way that you can do that is to plan. When I go to college, I'm going to join this club. When I go to college, here's what I'm going to do. Here's the on-call service that I can use. Here's my family member that lives close by. The best way of managing crisis and managing potential difficulty is to have a plan in place. And excuse me, I hear too often, well, but how am I going to know what I need until I need it? Great point. You can't plan for everything. So plan for what you can. Plan for that connection. We know establishing connections decreases your overall risk. So let's plan for you to get connected. And I think this is a nice resource. Another nice resource is this JED Foundation. Take a peek if you're sending anybody off to school. Again, I'm not going to go through this article with you because the one take-home point is connecting. How do you mindfully make connections with people? Maybe it's attending a TA group after class so that you get to know an upperclassman TA. Maybe it's stopping by your professor's office once a week, even if you really are doing fine. That way you have face-to-face and you can go in and talk to her when you're not doing well. Again, forming that connection. And I think sometimes when we are not our best in high school, when we are struggling with illness in high school and we're looking at transitioning, it's harder to make these plans because we only have so much bandwidth. How now, okay, you have me going to IOP, you have me going to therapy, you have me taking medicine, you have me getting sleep. Now you want me to anticipate the schedule at which I'm going to check in with my chemistry professor? Yes, I do. In fact, you might be sitting down with me next time we get together and putting that schedule in writing once you get your schedule, class schedule, for example. Again, there are some risk factors that are modifiable. And if I can identify times during your day where we are going to have dedicated connection times, it may sound a little hokey, but guess what? It reduces those numbers. So this is another place where you can find nice references. Here's a disclosure. Dr. Ryan Patel down at Ohio State. I trained with him here at Cleveland Clinic a number of years ago. He has this great emotional fitness blog, and you can subscribe to it. I love it. He is very good at giving you resources if you're interested. But if you just look at this adjusting to college, down at the bottom, get connected, take care of yourself. These are not complicated tasks, but they do require mindfulness and planning. So again, he has all these categories of things that you can look for. I love this. He has done a brilliant job. Maybe Matt, we bring him in to talk specifically about transitioning to college because he's a very lovely resource. But all of my friends who are sending their kids to college, I sign them up for this email, and then I politely tell them that they're going to be getting it. Please confirm their email and read it. But he has a really lovely ability to bring ways. How do I do this? How do I form a connection into a short to-do list? And these are not lengthy blogs. Here's another one. College Student Mental Health, a guide. And he's going to cite some studies, and he's going to tell you why, and he's going to tell you how. So this is another just simple, comes in your message box, but I also think it's a very nice resource. How do we get more support to be available on campuses? There are agencies doing this. When you're visiting colleges, when you're visiting to decide where you're going to college, or when you're visiting colleges because you know you're going there, ask what is their structure? What's their program? What are they offering? Using data to develop programming is not happening in secret. What we're finding are that public universities are paying attention to this, and everybody kind of has their own that they've implemented and subscribed to. There's money for this. This is one such program. This is a foundation. I think my friend Ryan, the Big Ten has a group where they meet together and they are sharing a lot of the same resources. But again, what is that university offering? What is that college offering? And how do you tap into it? What if I'm a commuter? What if I'm living there? What if I'm out of state? Here's another one that I think anybody can use. This is an app. It's a free app. I love it because what does it do? It connects you. You download it, you can use your contacts. And I ask a lot of my young adults to do this. And what it does is if I'm in crisis, I reach out once. I don't have to think about or decide who I'm going to talk to, who I'm going to call. I may have 3 people identified, and when I press this button that I'm not okay, those 3 people are going to get a message that I need help. And then say I'm person number 2. I know person number 1 responded because I'm part of the response. So I can see. I think this is a really nice, cheap, easy connection tool. Takes the thinking, takes the planning out of it, and allows you to connect even when your executive function, your prefrontal cortex isn't working. Helps put the brake on. I want to take the last few minutes and talk about connections for young adults who are not going to college. I often find people who find themselves isolated if they're staying at home, getting a job. Other friends are leaving. Here I am, or here I am coming back from college because I'm sick and I need to do treatment. There are a number of ways that you can get connected. NAMI connection groups are a cheap and easy way. There is a beautiful clubhouse model that helps not only connect individuals, but helps validate feelings, can help you get connected with employment as well as connections with other people. But I think one of the main goals of the clubhouse model of recovery, which if you don't know about it, please click on, this is the one here in Cleveland. We are so lucky to have a strong, long-standing clubhouse model. But here's the piece. It's structured to end isolation. Isolation does not help anybody. And anyone with any sort of diagnosis is allowed to join. This is not a big commitment. This is an opportunity. And so I encourage folks another potential opportunity maybe to learn a little more about the clubhouse. But again, the governor's budget, the last budget, that has allowed for some new clubhouse formation. There's one that's up and going in Cincinnati. There's a new one in the works in Youngstown. There are a couple other ones that are applying for funding now. Again, how do I connect? How do I feel productive? This is it. There are ways we need to use them, and we need to be supportive of individuals who are looking to use them. So I think, oh, here we go. Okay. So here are some statistics for you in case you aren't familiar with the Clubhouse model. But please, again, if you plug in Magnolia Clubhouse to Google, so excuse me, it does link you. There is a national association. So if you want to look for something in Boston or in New York or in San Francisco, you can find connections there. And I've had some people move specifically to be near resources. And I think we need to help people know what to look for when we're looking for resources. We want to set people up to relocate or to transition out of school to a new social circle here as, dare I say, adults after high school. So I do believe that one is my last slide. So, all right, I have a good 11 minutes here, I think. So I am going to stop yapping here and let Matt jump in, and happy to take questions or have other folks share resources, whatever y'all think is appropriate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Varkula. I did put in the chat the links to Magnolia Clubhouse and also the emotional fitness blog with OSU, and also the link to the calendar of events on the NAMI Greater Cleveland website for anyone that wants to look at some of those resources. And I did just now drop the link to the survey for the evaluation for this presentation in the chat. If you could all open that and complete that for us. It's very brief. It's an anonymous survey. We appreciate your honest feedback on our programs. And we do have a few minutes. So if anyone has any questions for Dr. Varkula, feel free to drop those in the chat and we can see if we can answer those for you. I'll just give it another couple minutes to see if anyone wants to put in a question.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Here's a question. Do you believe that pseudo adults, in quotes, is an accurate label for individuals age 18 to 25? Thoughts on that language?
I think pseudo adults. I feel like a pseudo adult sometimes. I think we could, call them what we want to call them. I think pseudo to me sounds a little bit like trying to adult, right? So I think that there's some room for interpretation. I think being a pseudo something might assign, hey, you're really trying, but you're not doing it. I would hesitate to change language, I suppose. If someone's an adult, they're an adult. I like to tell people that, if you are 20, we need you to act like you're 20, unless we have a very good reason to allow you any leeway from acting like that. So I think from a medical standpoint, and that's my bias, I consider adolescence. I think until 25 or 26, I think you're an adolescent, and I think that gives you a bit more grace. That you are not, your breaks aren't quite mastered. I think I think I would hesitate to assign any sort of negative connotation by using the word pseudo. And I think, again, you could interpret it both ways. I don't like to give people room to interpret things negatively. But I think if you are an aspiring adult, perhaps might have, again, a little bit more of a positive connotation. In my head, I wish that we would, or in my world and in my head, we extend adolescence until 25 or 26, and we kind of call it what it is.
Yeah, I wrote in the chat a term I've heard that maybe you would maybe like more is emerging adults. I don't know if you've heard that language. Yeah.
We use that a lot in education, right? So thinking
Yes.
young kids, are our skills, are they emerging? Are we mastering them? I think that's a very modern educational sort of, I wonder if people are familiar with that, Matt. From grade school on up, they're starting to look at skills as being emerging. I think that might be consistent with the way we are assessing people academically as well. I like that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. It's I did learn it in the context of education, and I believe part of the rationale behind that language is that many young adults, they now have with the rise of more and more young people attending college, there's this kind of built-in developmental period of those years where you
Yeah.
are beginning to implement some of the skills of adulthood, but you're also in these systems that kind of provide a level of supervision and support that you don't
Hmm.
necessarily have in, you know, early adulthood into middle adulthood onward. Yeah.
Right, right. No, that's a good point.
So, yes, I did just put the link to the survey back in the chat for the person that asked. And another question we had was, do you find that these resources and tools apply equally to teens and young adults who are neurodivergent?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the interest, and I think it depends on what sort of identification a neurodivergent individual is formulating at that moment. I think part of, excuse me, my approach with individuals who identify as neurodivergent are is to give them a little more leeway. So to allow for a little bit more gray area. Um, and I think when we're looking at colleges and universities, I think they are allowing for a bit more protected space. I think that perhaps in the general community, it's more of a challenge, the connections, especially for folks who are not in an urban setting, or for folks who are not identifying with, is my neurodivergence an autism type diagnosis, or is my neurodivergence a gender identity type diagnosis? I think we are fortunate in Cleveland to have young adult resources for autism, for gender identity. We have therapists who are embracing and promoting their businesses as good matches for these individuals. But I think it depends on what you're looking for and where you are, as well as allowing yourself to change. I think, for example, the clubhouse model takes anyone, and if you need a place to get support while you're transitioning a gender, or while you're working on social behaviors, it's all good. It doesn't really matter. So I think if it's important for the individual to be surrounded by others with similar neurodivergence, then I think that's a bit more limiting. But when you're looking for someone who is looking to connect regardless, then I think it is perhaps a bit easier. I think again, it depends on that goal. What am I looking for at this point in my development, and what's important to me? And so I think that's why it's important for major universities, colleges, and community centers to have both programming for all comers, but also programming for more specific identifications. Depends where you are in your journey, I think.
And so we have time for one more question here, which might be a good way to sum things up. What symptoms of mental health, mental illness or mental health conditions in young adults and college students should we be mindful for or be alert to as maybe
Mhm.
indicating a sign of some need for support?
Well, I think academics fortunately give us a bar, right? So if we see someone who's been an all A student, excuse me, all through high school, and is now all of a sudden failing every class, I think that's the easy thing, right? I often tell people, stay in touch with your child's in a way that you can keep an eye on eating, on sleeping. When depression stops being, for example, I'm going to use depression when because we already looked at that anxiety sheet graphic. When depression stops being just a mood and becomes an illness, we start to see changes in functioning. We start to see changes in sleep. We start to see missed classes. We might see weight loss or weight gain. I always tell people, make sure you are FaceTiming or you are Skyping or whatever you're using. Get a visual on that kid and see what your child looks like. If your child is not looking like your child, that's a difference. Now, the other piece that I would say is, if you know your warning signs, if you've had 2 episodes of depression in your teens and now you're going away, that's where I would start to look for putting together a plan of, I am not sleeping, mandates a call home. I have missed 2 classes in a row or 2 days of class in a row. That at that point, I need to talk to my residence hall director, or I need to call my therapist. I think when it's a new presentation, and unfortunately, again, big bad stuff starts to happen and starts to cook in the brain during this time, then I think you look for significant changes, not only in functioning, but also in behavior. And so I think that what you can do is trust your gut. If you know someone, even if you think you don't, and you get that feeling like something's wrong, investigate further. If you see changes in pattern, yes, your child may be growing, but your child may also be struggling or abusing a substance or not sleeping or in a big, massive fight with a roommate and feeling isolated. So I think looking for changes and trusting your gut. If you sense that someone's struggling, don't underestimate that. Because I think sometimes we're aware of things in that amygdala part of our brain and the deep down part, the gas pedal part before we can pinpoint what's going on up here. And so I think that communicating, connecting with your child as best you can before they transition to school is going to be really helpful, and maintaining that regular contact, even if you're half a continent away. Keep an eye on them and see what you observe, but also see what you sense.
It's so fortunately have to wrap it up at this moment. Thanks so much, Dr. Varkula, and thank you to all of you
Thank
for
you.
joining us today. And again, this was recorded, and I will make sure the slides are shared with you all in a follow-up email later today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.